What's shaking? My name's Cam, welcome back to another video. I make lots of videos about fantasy and horror books, so if that's your kind of thing then I would love it if you stuck around. The Green Bone saga by Fonda Lee is a trilogy that I've heard a lot of good things about. And I know it's become a bit of a cliche to talk about living up to the hype, but when it comes to these books, I'm just gonna skip the foreplay and tell you straight up that it is bonkers good. It's nutty. So I finished Jade Legacy about a week ago and I still find myself time to time staring out the window like I'm in a mid-90s music video. I'm not going to include any major spoilers in this video, but what I will say is that the ending left me with a feeling that I haven't really gotten from books in quite a long time. I guess I would describe the feeling as like bittersweet, like I got all of the answers that I needed from the story. It's wrapped up as conclusively as it possibly could be, and yet I still find myself genuinely grieving the fact that it's over. So, the Green Bone saga, consisting of Jade City, War, and Legacy. I would say it's an urban fantasy. While taking place in a technically fictional world, or at least part of the world, there are a lot of people like you and me that are just living their lives in a world much like ours. They drive their cars to work, they watch TV, they cry in the shower, all of the stuff that we all do. During the story, we follow a family called the Carls. They're part of a powerful crime family, or a clan, who happen to be fighting a generational war against other clans and groups. And almost all of this takes place on the island of Kacon, and there are other nations that do play a pretty important part in the story, but for the most part, this is a super character-focused story that takes place on that island. And that, I would say, is this story's biggest strength. The characters. One of the best things I've found about Fonda Lee's writing and her abilities as a storyteller is that she has the absolute chadness to do something that not many other fantasy authors will do. She'll cruise through pretty large parts of the story very quickly and simply tell you what you missed. This is something she does especially in book 3. And doing this can obviously go very wrong, but she does it so well. The stuff we're cruising past isn't unimportant, but it works just fine as paving the way to more important moments and events. I find myself thinking about how other fantasy authors would tell this story, and I think for the most part, they would turn these 3 books into 10, and I think the books themselves would be much longer. They would probably be going over every single detail and every single event in excruciating detail and make sure they're quite literally walking you through absolutely everything that happens. But not Fonda Lee. I have an extreme amount of appreciation and respect for the fact that she knows her readers are smart enough to just fill in the blanks. So we have the brothers Lan and Elo, as well as their sister Shay, and as the story progresses we meet other important characters who also grow and develop over the course of the books. And these books quite literally span an entire lifespan. It's very cool. We'll watch characters go from their teen years to middle age, and that's one of the greatest things about these books. We aren't just watching characters grow over the course of a story arc, but more so grow through different stages of life and maturing and learning from things that happen. These books focus not only on families trying to stay alive while trying to gain more power, but we also watch as they learn from the mistakes of others, mistakes that we have seen those other characters make earlier in the story. More than I would say probably most other fantasy books, we get to watch these characters truly grow and change, and I think that's a huge part of why after finishing, you realize just how emotionally attached you really were getting to these characters. Now, I don't want to turkey slap you with the worn out expression morally grey. I know a lot of people use that a lot more than they probably should, but in a story about characters doing extremely questionable things in service of a greater good, there really is no other way to put it. In retrospect, Hilo is an awful guy. He does some absolutely grotty stuff for extremely selfish reasons. And yet, even when we're rooting against him, it's still in hopes that he'll come around and do the right thing. I want to make a comparison, and it's going to seem really goofy, but just bear with me. Sons of Anarchy. Jax Teller is very similar to Hilo. So both of these characters are young hotheads within a crime family of sorts who inexplicably find themselves on the receiving end of a great big bag of responsibility. In the beginning, they aren't so much learning to mature, rather than they're being thrust into a position where they have to. And while this is happening, they're becoming increasingly disenchanted by the violence involved with tradition for tradition's sake. They continually ask themselves a very important question, and I would say a theme within the series as a whole: how many more times can I use the excuse, the ends justify the means? A lot like the MC in that show, you have a clan who is just trying to tread water while furthering their own goals, and more often than not, it ends terribly, horribly for them. In reading this series, there were so many moments that just kind of made me stop and go, holy sh! Every time you get lulled into an ominous calm of these chess matches between the crime families and their politics, Fonda Lee will hit you with a story moment that reminds you just how much danger these characters are really in. So up until right now, you might have heard everything I've said and completely forgotten that this is even considered a fantasy story. It is though, and it is primarily because of the magic system. That's the way it normally goes with urban fantasies. For the most part, it will seem like a pretty standard action story set within our world, but then you throw in elements like magic and maybe monsters, that kind of stuff, and that's what makes it fantasy. There aren't any monsters in this series, maybe aside from some of the characters themselves, but there is a magic system. There are these very aesthetically pleasing jade stones that will imbue specific bloodlines with abilities like super strength, super durability, and I would say, different branches of telekinesis. A complex magic system that is so large and important that it becomes its own character within the story is one of the funnest things in fantasy, and it's almost always a plus. For example, that's one of the things that Brandon Sanderson is well known for. The approach of a complex magic system that is so large it's almost its own character is almost the opposite of what Fonda Lee has done in her approach. And if you had told me that before going into this series, I probably would have been super turned off, but butter my buns, it works. Don't get me wrong, the Jade Magic is very important to the story. Crucial even. It's really interesting because a lot of the things I'm saying and I'm gonna say about the magic system in this series might sound like a negative or a con, but it really isn't. The Jade Magic in these books is very rarely the explicit focus or most important thing that is happening in any one scene. More often than not, the magic is simply a tool for the plot to get where it needs to go. It is a tool for the characters to use to achieve their goal. I think technically if you made some big tweaks, you could still tell the same basic story of the Green Bone saga without Jade Magic. You could still have the same kind of clan wars, family dynamics. You could have it be just another gangster story. You could replace the Jade Magic with some real world thing that gives these clans a huge advantage over everyone else. But the magic adds such an important flavor and aesthetic to the world building here that I think truly makes this story its own. I think if I was to give any con about this series, it would just be on the topic of world building, being that we don't actually see too much of the world outside of KCON. There is one other nation that we spend a lot of time in, which I won't name, but it would have been really interesting to see how the world at large, like the entire rest of the world, actually feels about this island of enchanted beings. Something that's super important with urban fantasy in the world building is the aesthetic that you're setting. Is it noir? Is it like coastal modern? Blah blah blah. And the Green Bone Saga's aesthetic, I would say, is dark and sexy. Like turning on a brand new iPhone from your skyrise apartment during a storm. Now that's a weird example, I know. I don't know how else to describe the atmosphere this story takes place in other than dark and sleek. Everything feels clean and sharp, but also grim and dangerous. There is an ominous mood all the time, which, is a far departure from most other gangster stories that we have. Usually they'll follow like the 50s noir vibe, where everything feels gritty and grimy, which can be a lot of fun as well, especially in the brooding detective books and stories. So in my review videos going forward, I want to start doing something called review reaction, where I pick out an interesting review for one of these books from Goodreads, and I just chat about it. And the purpose here isn't to clown on anyone or to say that they are wrong. Everyone obviously has a right to their own opinion. The point is just to see what other people are saying and maybe have a chat about it. So here's one that I think raises a really interesting topic. Didn't finish, nor did I get far. All the characters were men. When a female character finally showed up, she was promptly put into a sex scene. I'm not interested in another world populated and controlled by men, where women only appear as objects for sex. Look, while I feel like the person who wrote this review might have jumped off board very prematurely before really getting one of the major points of this story, that's fine. If they're not interested in reading a story about a world controlled by men, then yeah, these books probably aren't for them. But on the topic of women in this series only being used as objects, I think that is insanely far from the track that this story goes on. A huge, massive theme within these books is the power structures that are built by men, especially when we're referring to, old crime family dynamics. It's interesting because so much of the story of this series felt like the complete opposite of what this reader got from it so far. Maybe if you read like the first chapter, yeah, that's the vibe you would be getting, but Shay, one of the major characters of the entire story, her whole character arc within the story is for a large part to specifically shine a spotlight on the sexist traditions within structures like this. And not only shine a spotlight on them, but challenge them, and boy does she do that. I would argue that the Green Bone saga, more than a lot of other fantasies I've read, does a really good job of challenging the boys club dynamic within powerful organizations like the clans here. I mean, probably the largest antagonist in the entire series is the leader of another crime family who happens to be a woman, and the fact that she is a woman comes up a lot during the story, and it is always pretty much dunked on relentlessly. I mean, her being a woman isn't dunked on. I mean, the fact that people are skeptical about having a woman as a clan leader is dunked on, and it's dunked on pretty viciously. So there you go. The Green Bone saga absolutely blew me away. This is one of the best, I can confidently say this is one of the best fantasy series I've read. Absolutely one of the best, if not the best, urban fantasy I've read. It's definitely one of my new favorites, and I would highly recommend it, even if urban fantasy isn't normally your thing, because that's a subgenre that I definitely don't find myself running to a lot. But yeah, those are my thoughts. I'm really glad that you guys recommended this series to me. Thank you so much. And on the topic of thanking you, thank you so much for watching the entire video. You're my favorite. Let me know what you think of the series in the comments below if you've read it, or let me know how you feel about urban fantasy in general. I did a whole video, I'll leave a card up here, I did a whole video talking about that particular subgenre and the things I like about it, the things I don't, so you can watch that if you like. Otherwise, I make lots of fantasy book videos on here, so hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Happy reading. Catch ya.